Dear colleagues, in this lecture, which is part of the Agroheritage project, we'll talk about some historical aspects of forest use in Europe. But first, let's say some words about forests at all. According to known fossil records, first forests had emerged some 380 million years ago in mid-Devonian period. Since then, forests have evolved as one of the key ecosystems with great impact on Earth's biosphere. As the eons passed by, they gradually gained organizational complexity and species diversity. Upon occupying sufficiently large area, forests became able to influence local microclimate and microenvironment, temperature, rainfall, wind strength, water retention, soil erosion, to name a few. As a merging point of biotic and environmental factors, forests allowed for numerous habitats within occupied area. During the eons, forest ecosystems were shaped by global climate parameters and local conditions, interlocked with microbial, plant, and animal evolution, and proved to be highly adaptable to ever-changing elements, until a new species evolved that was capable of extensively use available natural resources, the modern humans. Human evolution had started some 4 million years ago in Africa. It is believed that early stages were connected to movement from forest environment to open spaces. Much later, after a long Dark Age period, Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons reached a land that is now known as Europe. Here, they meet quite diverse landscapes: plains, hills and mountains, rivers, swamps, lakes, long shorelines, islands, as well as variety of climatic zones ranging from subtropical to polar tundra and, in some period, glacial shields. Along with grasslands, they have met several types of forests. These forests were mature, well-established ecosystems covering tens or hundreds of thousands square kilometers plains, hills and mountains. There is no doubt that most populations were in close contact with forests and that some turned into forest dwellers. There is a little archaeological evidence about our ancestors' day-to-day life in forest or forest borders. We can have a glimpse of these early times based on survived myths, interpolation of available historical records, but also watching currently existing tribes in equatorial rainforests. Combining the knowledge, one can conclude that forests have played an important role for ancient people from the very early stages of social development to the rise of first civilizations and beyond. How significant were forests and what role they played for human societies? For human societies, forests appear to play three main roles: a treat, a hide, a resource. Moreover, it's often difficult to separate these roles during human evolutions. Forests were considered as a treat throughout the entire human history. Myths, beliefs, tales, many of them warns about risks and dangers exposed to children or untrained persons, predators lurking in the dark, a place where one can be lost. Reports for robbers and bandits terrorizing forest roads are known from Greek and Roman sources and quite abundant from medieval times. Nowadays, this is still a problem, especially for some world regions. Forest as a hide. The use of forests as hideouts is well documented in a number of sources ranging from classic times through medieval period under current time. Forests as a resource. The most significant role for human societies. the main value factor and one of the reasons for deforestation. What kind of resources forests can provide to humans? Food, forest berries, seeds, fruits, mushrooms. All of them were important nutritional source for first societies because they can be stored for prolonged periods, especially during the winter months, as is or in dried form. Forests were also used as hunting grounds. Since the animal biomass production in forest ecosystems is lower than in grasslands, in medieval times hunting was heavily restricted and remained available to high classes only. Nowadays, the use of forest food resources is regulated in most European countries, especially for hunting. Medicine plants. High biodiversity was noted by our predecessors, who empirically discovered the health effect of numerous plants and their parts, leaves, flowers, roots, seeds. For millennia, forest plants were among the main source of bioactive compounds for illness treatment. Today, these natural ingredients are mostly replaced by chemical industry, but are still used in some niche products. Firewood, usually obtained from fallen trees, but also by logging. Firewood was the main source for cooking and heating all over Europe. Even now, in some regions, firewood is still preferred for heating. Despite being considered as obsolete, the use of firewood is carbon neutral and may return its former positions. Building material. Wood materials were used for house building since early human history. In most of Europe, wood was the cheapest available material. Another use was to build fortifications, especially in regions where stone quarries were either absent or too far positioned. Even today, wood is used for building high-end houses. Houseware. Wood was also a cheap and convenient material to build furniture, doors, window frames, small items like spoons, garden tools, carts. Shipbuilding is another main human activity that was heavily depending on forests. Since the first boats, for millennia, ships were built from wood until mid-19th century, when steel became mass-produced. Nowadays, wood is not considered for shipbuilding and is gradually replaced even from the last remaining niches. Even during industrial era, wood was still used as a machinery construction material. For example, the boilers of first steam engines were made of wood, not steel. It was too expensive at that time. First high-tech machines like airplanes and cars were also made from wood. Even in mid-20th century, one of the most prominent airplanes, the Ivelin DH-98 Mosquito, was made by wood, balsa. Even today, in 21st century, the superstructure of the most advanced battleship, Zumwalt-class destroyer, is made by balsa carbon fiber composite. What were the consequences of such extensive forest use? Despite that forests were recognized as a resource, at some point of human history, they became actively destroyed, a process known as deforestation. But first, a brief overview on European forests. With a constantly changing climate, there is no perfectly stable type of forest anywhere in the world, but especially not in Europe. The land is barren, cold and dry Arctic tundra at one point in history, and the humid, warm and dense closed-in forest at other times. The period from 8000 to 7000 BC seems to mark the last most heavily wooded time for the European region. Parts of southern Europe that are today dry and with few trees were closed in with deciduous forests. Iceland had open boreal forest. Northern Israel was populated with open woodland. The history of forest use in Europe can be described by a single word: deforestation. The primitive societies had a diminutive effect on forest ecosystem. Lack of technologies, sufficiency of naturally available resources kept forest and society in equilibrium. Things had changed during the late Neolith, early Bronze Age with the spread of agriculture and the development of new tools. First significant impact on European forests was made by hunter-gatherer cultures, which cultivated the forest for their own purposes, but on a small scale as well. The starter factor for main deforestation were increased human population along with first technological advances. This determined the two main reasons of deforestation: agriculture and shipbuilding. The first reason for deforestation was the spread of agriculture with its ever increasing demand for arable lands. Modern agriculture had risen in Near East Mesopotamia some 8,000 years ago. From 5,000 to 3,000 BC, agriculture spread to most parts of Europe, but this was at a small scale and only affected forests locally. Nevertheless, a conflict between the needs for arable lands and remaining forests arise. Pollen-based reconstructions indicate that forest conversion to agricultural land had started during 4 millennia BC and was well underway by 3000 BC. A millennium later, the anthropogenic impact coinciding with climate change had led to the loss of nearly 60% of mid-Holocene forest maximum. The transformation of Europe's landscape from wildwood to farmland continued through Iron Age and Roman times. Research had revealed that the dynamic of forest cover well correlates with the activity of contemporary human societies. While deforestation was significant during Roman times, it was halted or reversed in the post-Roman period. Post-Roman decline in rural settlement was accompanied by regrowth of secondary forests in many regions. Deforestation process resumed at an accelerating rate in early medieval period, when forests were again cleared to make way for farms and villages, especially in north-central Europe. The transformation of forests into cultural lands during medieval and later times is well recorded in textual, place name and other historical evidence. It might be estimated that land clearance had led to the loss of over 70% of the forest cover between pre-medieval and modern times. It is clear that by the late Bronze Age, agricultural communities had already made significant inroads into transforming the natural vegetation and beginning a process that was accelerated through late prehistory and historic times. As a result, all territories suitable for agriculture are now almost deprived of forests and woodlands. Nowadays, there are remnants of majestic forests that once covered the continent from the Mediterranean shores to the coasts of Arctic Ocean. The second most important driver of Europe deforestation was the shipbuilding. Loss of 3 species related to shipbuilding is mentioned in the Bible. Noah has built the ark from gopher tree, a species that still cannot be identified and highly likely became extinct due to the excessive demands at that time. Deforestation due to shipbuilding became really significant during exploration era, when large ocean-going ships were built in huge numbers. In this case, the pressure on forest ecosystems was increased because largest trees were needed, ecosystem members that are hard to replace. Moreover, wooden ships were needed to be replaced every 10 or 20 years, which put additional enormous pressure on the forest ecosystems and wood resources. But the shipbuilding alone was not the only driver of deforestation. Medieval ships were built using iron in large volumes. As a result, the iron metallurgy raised twice the demand for wood. High wood demand was constant at that time, since other manufacturers like glass, porcelain, copper making also used wood as a main energy source in the form of charcoal. An interesting example of targeted species elimination due to the production demands is yew, Taxus baccata. Yew was used for making longbow in England during 14th and 15th century AD. Between 1350 and 1360 AD, demand was so huge that the price rose 10 times. This price rise was directly related to the drastic decrease of yew population across Europe, especially England, as well as Western and Central Europe. The effect of deforestation due to agriculture, shipbuilding and industry was enormous. Mediterranean coastal forests were almost completely destroyed. At one point of Irish history, nearly 90% of forest trees were converted to timber. The same is true for most regions all across Europe. Scars from these times can still be seen on today's landscapes. The need for forest protection efforts was recognized quite recently. First protected forests were organized during medieval period as privately owned lands with limited public access. It's interesting that such private forests later became famous national parks like Prater in Vienna and Tiergarten in Berlin. The role of forests as recreation zones was recognized in 20th century only. Nowadays, there are several hundred national parks and protected areas across Europe. Few examples: Argyll, first British recreation forest park; Ivelin National Park in Germany; Black Forest National Park in Germany; National Park of Champagne and Bourgogne in France. Although farming has drastically altered the landscape, some large tracts of ancient forests have been preserved in various parts of Europe. The largest remnant of primeval European forests is Belovezhskaya Puszcha forest, shared between Poland and Belorussia. Another fragment of ancient Europe can be found in Carpathian Mountains in Romania. What is the future of European forests? It seems that current EU policy stimulates reforestation and sustainable exploitation of forests' resources. A great sign is the growing number of companies adopting practices for sustainable forests use. To our opinion, forests in Europe will never fully reconquer their territories, but have a good chance to be protected from extinction. Let's make a brief summary of this lecture. Forests are one of the key ecosystems on Earth, robust and highly adaptable to environmental changes. The main challenge was human activity. Forests were recognized as a valuable resource, but growth of human population, spread of agriculture and technological advances triggered the deforestation process. Conversion of woodland to arable land was the first significant factor. Shipbuilding and early metal industry put additional pressure. As a result, nowadays Europe lost nearly 90% of its primeval forests. Fortunately, our conservation efforts took place during the last 100 years. Current policies and spread of sustainable practices make us optimistic about the future of European forests. Thank you for attention.